the speaker. The speaker is a beautiful woman who I met 13 or so years ago. She loves the program of Narcotics Anonymous. She loves doing service work. She has an incredibly beautiful spirit. She always has a smile on her face. She is just a very beautiful person who I am grateful to have as my sponsor. I would like to introduce Denise B. from Fort Wayne.
Hi, I'm Denise, and I'm an addict. Hi, Denise. And it's funny because a month ago, Kim was sharing somewhere, and I told her, "Oh, you're just going to do fine, and just get up there and do it." And she was all nervous, and I was just encouraging her. Now tonight, I'm all nervous, so I just know I need to start, and then I'll be okay. I just want to thank these guys for asking me to share this. And this is a place, out of the 21 years, I've probably missed 2 or 3 years, whether I've come up for the day or the weekend or whatever, and I just feel the love up here each time, and somebody was saying tonight just how serene it is here, and it truly is. And I know our group from Fort Wayne always looks forward to coming up here and that, so something I always look forward to. But anyhow, I'm just going to go ahead and start. I'm the third of 4 children, and 3 of us are addicts. Fortunately, all 3 of us are in recovery today. I have one brother that doesn't go to meetings, but he's still about staying clean, and he went for a long time and then just chose not to, but just to come back anymore. So anyhow, I was born, and 7 months later, my dad had committed suicide. And for the longest time, my mom, my grandparents, they had just told us that it was an accident and that he was cleaning out a shotgun, and that's what had happened. And, I grew up, my grandparents were really instrumental in my life. My mom started to go back to work, and so I spent a lot of time over there. And we're Italian, and they came from Italy, so they had this broken accent and everything. And just growing up, I always kind of felt different because back then, I'm 54 years old, but back then, everybody did have a mom and dad. And I was one of those kids that didn't, And my mom worked a lot, so when we had school activities, she either didn't come or, she just couldn't make it, no fault of her own. But, so, it just kind of always felt left out or just different in that regard. And, life went on. I really didn't go without for anything, And like I said, we just spent a lot of time with my grandparents because my mom was working and that. And then I get into like junior high school and, just hanging around with the crowd, and I started smoking cigarettes and then going in the parking lot at McDonald's and hanging out and drinking beers. And I didn't even like beer. It made me sick. Just even the taste and that. But, that's what everybody was doing. And so I just followed suit. And then I got into the late junior high school and started smoking a lot of pot. And, back then it was cheap and that stuff, and that was the thing. And as I got a little older, I graduated, and I was supposed to go to college, and I'm like, oh, no, I just want to take a year off and party. I just did 18 years of school, and that. And needless to say, I didn't go back to college till after I got in recovery, all those years later. But so the guy I was hanging with, we quit smoking the pot and just started drinking, and then I got DUIs, I got reckless driving, and back then it wasn't a felony, you just got your license suspended, and I'd gotten accidents and, just that whole lifestyle of drinking and driving and that, and tickets and all that kind of stuff, and I only had to spend like 24 hours in jail, and I couldn't wait to get out, and my brother and his girlfriend had picked me up. I'm like, God, you go give me a quart of beer, and they kind of just looked at me like I was fucking nuts or something, and they didn't, and I went home. But after a while, I was court ordered to go to the other fellowship, and so I prided myself in not drinking, but I was shooting dope. I started shooting dope, and I'd be sitting in the AA meetings nodding out, But I was proud of the fact that I did not drink. And that was like a big thing, at least I'm not drinking, and everybody at work could tell that, But as I started, and I just started off just using on weekends, and, and through high school I'd done every other thing too, and that, but I just I remember doing a story in high school about marijuana use and that it would lead to harder drugs, and I'm like, oh my God, that's crazy. Look, and I'm not doing that, Needless to say, years later, I'm the one shooting dope, but and that went on for quite a while, and so anyhow, the weekends started then to become every day, and I had worked. I don't know if you call it a functioning addict, but I thought I was, and I'd go to work every day, sicker than a dog. By noon, I thought of a grand plan to get some money, whether I used my charge card, wrote a bad check, stole money, I did something enough to get me high, go out for lunch, come back, and be a completely different person. I also worked with my sister and my mom at the same place, and my boss, they knew I was up to something, and I had wrote on a credit card all these checks, and it took like a month for them to come back. And they were like $200-300 checks each one, I think I had 4 of them written, and they never came back, so I'd write another one, and write another one. I thought, oh, they just upped my credit limit, or something. And then one day they started coming back, and my boss called me in the office, and, he's like, what's going on? And he goes, I know something's different with you. He goes, because you come back from lunch, your voice is different, and you're just completely different. Do you need help? And he goes, we're willing to help you any way we can. And I'm like, no, I'm fine. I can handle this. I'm good. And so I just started, when I'd go out for lunch, I'd only do half of what I normally did. And, thinking I'm still good, and I'd come back to work and even put a sign up, and back then it was a saying, just say no. You put this sign up going down the steps, and I don't know what other people thought, but I knew what it was intended for was for me, and that. And, I did that. I worked there 13 and a half years. I used either pot, the drinking, the heroin, the Dilatas, the whole gambit I went through that place at. And, it came, and I worked a lot around a lot of money. I also worked with the public, and actually it was at the drivers, or the BMV. And so I did favors for people with it, whether it's fake IDs, learner permits, anything I possibly could to get dope. And crack had really started to come into Fort Wayne at that time. And, spent a whole month of just doing nothing but that, and I couldn't stand it, it was tearing me up. I didn't like the coke or the crack, so I just went back to the dope. And a friend, this guy was a friend, and he had quit his job just to get his 401k, and we went through that money like in a month. And it was a mixture, of all kinds of drugs and that stuff, and so I was really strung out, and my grandma had died, and I had taken my mom's credit card, and I charged it at work to get the money, and the police came because previously I'd used it at Kohl's, and it was the whole thing. You guys, I'm sure, have all done this, but finding ways and means to get more, and that's all it was. And so the police came down to work, and they were questioning me, and then my boss, and my grandma just died, and I had to go tell my mom that the police had her credit card, and and I was just, it was just bad. And, I got through that, and then I ended up like within a month stealing money from my job. And what I did was, you'd mail in, and I would keep your registration and cash your check and take that money. And I'd keep that registration thinking, when I get paid, I'm just going to buy your plates and send them back to you, and it'd all work out. And it probably did for like a couple checks, and then it just got to the point where I just kept the money, and I had stole $655 like within this week's time or whatever, and I made a mistake. $20. It was a $20 error in the cash register drawer. And so my bosses, they all knew I was up to something. They just couldn't figure out what I was doing or how I was getting money. And I really wasn't stealing that whole time out of the drawer. I would just do everything else I could. But anyhow, I made that $20 mistake, and they checked everything out. I came into work the next day, all, of course, strung out, and my boss called me into the office, and it's like, hey, this drawer was $20 short. And I'm like, oh, I made change. I probably didn't do the right thing, and blah, blah, blah. And she goes, well, we can't find the paperwork for it. And I just knew I was busted. I knew it. And I'm like, well, that's because it's at my house, And so she had to call the commissioner down, who I knew, and all this stuff. And he comes down there, and he was from Indy, and he came down, and he's like, if it was $500, he goes, I would let it go and just tell you to go get help. But because it was over that dollar amount, I know it was only 100 and some bucks over that, they had to press charges against me. And they gave the option of me either resigning or getting fired. And I'm like, well, I'm going to resign, I ain't going to have to say I'm fired on my record. But, so I resigned, and they pressed charges, and I ended up getting 2 years probation out of that. And even my attorney at the time, she's like, God, can't you get the money? I can get this dropped down to a Class A misdemeanor. I'm like, if I could get the money, I wouldn't be sitting in there, And so it became a Class D felony, and I got put on probation for 2 years. And before I went to court, I thought, I really got to straighten up. I got to get clean, and partied all night. This guy dropped me off at 3 o'clock in the morning at a hospital to go in through the detox center. And I went in there, and they kept me in there, God, forever. And they came back and said, well, we're sorry, we don't have a room for you. And I'm like, okay, it must not be my time. So I walked to the dope house, get a hit or whatever, go home. Another hospital calls me and says, oh, no, we got room for you. And I'm like, no, I'm okay. I can do this, And needless to say, I kept using, and I'd have to go check with the probation department or whatever, and I'd be in there high. I had the long sleeves on and the jacket, and telling my probation officer I was working for my brother, and all this stuff, and I kept using I think I did get clean for 6 months, and my one brother he was 20-some years old, and my brothers both used, and that for me growing up, and my oldest brother, would break into my mom's house and steal all our TVs and our change, and I hated him. There was no way I was going to be like that. There's just no way. And, we just all didn't like him. It's like, oh, is he coming around? And by the end of my using, we were best friends. We were best friends. And actually, I had my other brother had gotten clean. And in Fort Wayne at that time, there was really no NA. It was just starting. And he had went to the other fellowship, but then he found NA was starting to go around, and he was traveling around. I remember he went to Ohio to the World Literature Conference, and going to New Jersey and Florida with all these other people and that he didn't know, and we thought he joined a cult, and I remember him coming home and telling me one time, hey, they've got this book, it's for addicts. He goes, you may be an addict, but I can't tell you that, but you may be. And I'm like, no, I'm okay. And I had beer in the refrigerator and all this stuff, and then it's like, oh yeah, but my disease just wasn't apparent to me at that time. I worked, I had some credit, I did things, and it just wasn't apparent to me. And so he continued in recovery, but so anyhow, when I'd gotten on probation, he asked if I wanted to go to a meeting with him, and I did, and I remember that first meeting, just hearing him share, and I was just in there bawling my eyes out, just crying, and I don't even know what anybody shared or what he shared, but it just hit me, and I thought, oh, I'm going to do this, I went to a treatment center, and they kept me, I was going to go in there actually, I started using again. And I called up my other brother who was trying to get clean. He always would go in and out, in and out, in and out. And so I called him, and at this time he was clean. He goes, just grab your coat. I just called him crying. I said, man, I just can't do this anymore. I just can't do this anymore. And he said, grab your coat, and I'm going to beep the horn, come and get you. And he took me to a detox center, and it was only supposed to be for 3 days. And they ended up having a bed, so I was able to stay there 30 days, and I had to call my probation officer. And he's like, you know what, just call me when you get out. Just call me when you get out. And I'm like, okay. And I think then is when I stayed clean for like 6 months. I got a little job. And I got a job where from my probation officer to work with his daughter at this toy place. And I started stealing money from there, and I'm like, oh my God, I got to get off this shift. I can't do this, I can't get caught again, and I ended up quitting that job because I didn't want to get caught stealing, and then that's when I started telling my probation officer I was working for my brother because he had started up a painting company, and he was the one that was in recovery and started doing real well for himself. We seen him changing. He'd come over at Christmas dinner and say, get up and leave because he had to go to a meeting and get the coffee pot going. And we would just look at him like, oh, the hell, and thinking he was crazy and all this stuff, and needless to say, as I kept on using, we would almost make fun of him because he was doing so well in his life. And he used to call, if he'd come over and we started arguing about stupid shit, every, 10 o'clock the phone would ring, and he'd be apologizing and making his amends. And after a while, that phone quit, we quit arguing or whatever, and he quit calling and stuff and making them amends, and but it was just the way, he lived his life, and me and my other brother wanted that. We just didn't know how to get it, and it wasn't like he ever threw the program down our throats. We would have a basic text laying around, and he'd leave literature and all that stuff. And my other brother had been in and out of the program and all that stuff. But I wanted what he had. I just didn't know how to ask for it. I just wanted to quit using, and I didn't know how. I knew I was addicted to drugs. I just didn't have no idea about the disease of addiction. And needless to say, so I kept on using. And I remember when I was working, I had friends that they didn't work and they stayed home and shot dope all day. And I remember wishing for that, And I ended up getting it, right? So then I got released from probation or whatever, but I started using after that 6 months again. I'd go to a meeting, and I remember it was a Friday night meeting, and I knew I was going to go there. And I stopped at a payphone, and I called my friend. I said, hey, I'm going to be over about 8:30. And they're like, oh, okay. And I went to that meeting. I didn't share nothing. I didn't say nothing. I just got up and I left, and I went over there and I got high. And that was it. I think I went back to one meeting saying I relapsed, and I never came back again. And for 3.5 years. And in that 3.5 years, it was a nonstop 24/7. I would get $5 in my hand and be gone. My mom, they gave me money to go get barbecue sauce one night. They gave me $20. I never came back for like 3 days. And I come back and they're like, you got this barbecue sauce? I'm like, hell no, But, it was that vicious cycle, I'd get money and I would just spend it. A friend of mine that he had hooked up with a girl in the family thing, and he'd kind of quit using. He calls me out of the blue, and he's like, God, I got this guy I work with, got this dope connection. I don't want to get involved with it, but he wants to, he needs somebody to help him move this stuff. And I remember, I had a God in my life. I grew up Catholic. The only time I prayed was for God to get me out of this one more time. And I swear to God, I will never use again. I'll never do it again. Just help me get through this. And I remember asking God that night, if he calls me tomorrow, it must be your will. He calls me the next day, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to be good. And so I had this connection, and I couldn't even make money off of it. All I wanted was dope from it. And I made a little bit of money or whatever and stuff, but, it was just break me off some dope, and I just want to keep getting high. That's all I wanted. So that continued on for 3.5 years, and I started started coughing really bad, and I, and I thought it was because of the heroin. When you draw, you get these coughs and all this stuff, and I thought it was from that, because once I did a hit, I was fine. Well, it just started getting deeper and deeper, and then I just didn't start to feel right. And I called my other brother, who was in recovery at the time. I'm like, dude, I just don't feel good. He goes, grab your coat, I'm gonna take you to the emergency room. Well, I go in there, and they could see that I was an IV user, and they wanted to keep me because of that reason, and put me on some antibiotics. They said I had some cough or congestion or whatever. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to go to treatment, And so there's another story I should tell you about how I fell off of a porch thing. I was drunk one night, and I fell off the porch, and I crushed a vertebrae in my back, and I didn't even know it, but I remembered sobering up and getting up, and I couldn't walk. Went to these neighbors' beds, and I woke up, and I'm like, God, I just gotta go see the dope guy. I gotta go get something for this, because this pain is killing me. So as long as I got high, I was okay for like 3 days, and then I had to go to this little job I had, and it was running a buffer at this time, and I just couldn't do it. So my friend came and picked me up. We went to the emergency room, and it was a doctor's office, and I think they thought I was just in there to get drugs, and they did x-rays, and I'm walking out, and I'm crying. He's carrying my purse, and he's like, they give you anything? I said, no, they just said there's, and the nurse comes running out, and she's like, oh my God, get back in here. Are you in pain? And I'm like, yeah. And she says, you need to go to the emergency room right now and take these x-rays with you. We went there, and they told me I had a crushed vertebrae, and they wanted to keep me at the hospital just to monitor that pain, because it could be severely, and I could really injure myself from my vertebrae, And I'm like, no, I'm okay. And they're like, well, what have you been taking? I'm like, oh, I got some of my mom's muscle relaxers. And they knew, they had to know, and when they released me, they're like, just keep doing what you're doing, because they knew. And so anyhow, I had to quit that job just so I could get my paycheck, and of course that was gone in one day. So, needless to say, but so anyhow, then I'm sick, and I go to the emergency room. They let me out, and I started to feel better. I had some antibiotics, and I started to feel better for like a month, and then it just hit me again, and I was just. I don't mean to talk about the drugs, but it was just what I used, and. I would speedball with the coke and heroin, and every time I did that, I would throw up. And so I kept thinking, well, what the hell is this, So I just didn't do the coke. I'd just do the heroin, and I wouldn't throw up. And then I had to test it, and I'd do it again, and I'd throw up. And then I just started feeling really sick, and it was more than a dope sick. It was just an inside thing that, man, just something ain't right. And all I wanted to do was go to my mom's. And I'm like in my 30s and living at anybody else's house. My clothes were at my mom's. I had no job, no car, no nothing, I had filed bankruptcy before. My cars were repossessed. I had no credit. It just went all downhill. And so I'm at my mom's, and I'm laying in her bed. My mom had MS and was in a wheelchair, and usually, we took care of her, or my sister did, because I was out using, and I remember her rolling in there and saying, do you want me to fix you some soup, and God, I just felt like an idiot, but I'm like, no, I'm okay, but I couldn't keep nothing down. I went and copped, like on a Monday night for somebody else, and I was freezing, I was just freezing to death. And the people that picked me up, they're like, man, you're burning up. And I'm like, I don't know, I'm so cold, And by this time, I can't even find a vein to shoot dope or anything, and I'm just squirting it in my mouth. And I was laying on the couch, and I just couldn't breathe. I took the cushions off. I tried laying on the floor. I couldn't do nothing, to feel comfortable. I went back in my sister's room, and I woke her up, and I'm like, man, I just got to go to the hospital. Something ain't right. And she's like, well, go call your fucking friends, because... The only time I went to my family is when I was hurting like that. I used them. They got to the point they wouldn't even give me money for cigarettes anymore, But I always went to them. And she's like, I'm just dropping you off. I got to go to work in the morning. And so she took me to the emergency room. She did come in with me. And the doctor came in and examined me, and he called her out in the hall. And he came back in and he says, we're going to keep you. You have a lump on your back and we need to run tests. So, I didn't even have a fight in me anymore. It's like, okay, back then they just started quitting smoking in the hospital, so I still have my cigarettes, right? I'd go in the bathroom, I have an oxygen thing, and I go in the bathroom, I'm in there smoking, the nurse comes in there, you can't smoke in here, and I couldn't even breathe. I'm coughing, they were giving me pillows to put on my stomach because I was just coughing so hard. So that was like, I don't know, I think I went in there Tuesday night, or Monday night. On Wednesday I had a lung biopsy, and I had all this fluid. The doctor showed me the tube, and it was a needle like this and a big tube, and it was just full of white pus. And he says, we're gonna put a drainage tube in you and start getting some of that fluid out, and run tests on it and all that stuff. And that was Wednesday. On Thursday, which was, my gum's getting stuck in my teeth, but on Thursday, it was Thanksgiving. So this was in November. And I remember that I finally got a pain shot. And I just remember sitting up thinking I was smiling from ear to ear, And I don't remember really anything else until January 12th. And what had happened is I had pneumonia, but I had an infection that went through all my body. I had a hole in my lung. My left lung collapsed, then my right lung collapsed. I was on life support. I had a chest tube out of my back. And I knew none of this. I knew none of this till after I got out of the hospital. And I just remember January 12th because it was my sister's birthday. And I remember waking up or coming to that day. And I had a trach, I had a tube in me. I couldn't even talk, I was kind of lipping everything. And I was in a drug-induced coma for like 7 weeks. I was in the hospital for 9 weeks. And they were going to keep me in treatment, or wanted me to go to treatment again because they knew what I did. And I'm like, no, I bring up my basic text, bring that basic text up. I'm not going to ever use again. And they did, and, I probably read it, or whatever. But anyhow, so I get out of the hospital. I'm on oxygen. And in the hospital, in that drug-induced coma, I had all these vivid dreams. And I don't remember a lot of them, but the one I do remember, I dreamt that I killed somebody and told my sister that I thought I had a warrant on. We had a cousin on the police department. I said, call Butch, see if I got a warrant out for me. I think I killed somebody, I didn't, but, and she never called him either. So when I get out of the hospital, I just happened to look in the mirror and I'm like, God, I got this scar on my back. I'm like, what the heck was this, And I go out and ask my mom, and she started telling me all these stories about, she'd call the hospital every day, and they thought at first I really did just have pneumonia. And he would tell her every day that, you have a very, 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 very sick daughter. And one of the dreams that I had is that the doctor came in and said, we're going to have to give you a tracheotomy in your thumb, and there's nothing else we can do for you. And I remember saying, I remember this, God, you've brought me this far, don't let me go now. And I remembered it was kind of like in a white room. I know this is cliche or whatever, but it was in a lit up room. There was all these gurneys with beds with white sheets on them. And I remember thinking, God, I just got to get out of here. I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here. And I came to, and I'm here today. By all means, I really should have been dead. And the nurses, I would run it. The nurses came up to my room and they're like, oh my God, we're so glad to see you. We've been tracking you since you've been admitted. We really didn't think you were going to make it. It really was a miracle. And that's what they told them. And I thank the doctors that I did have, and I think, I had no insurance or nothing, so they did whatever they could to save my life, and I believe God had them do that for a reason, And I remember going to a dentist. So anyhow, I get out, and I'm not going to use, and my other brother was back out using again, and he comes over, and I'm knowing where he's going. This was 2 weeks out of the hospital. I had an oxygen box, and oxygen. I was on oxygen. I had a chest tube hanging out of my back. And I'm like, well, I want to go with you, and I went with him and literally walked. I stepped each step I had to put one foot on and then the other for each step to go up to this dope house. And they're like, "Oh, we're so good to see you," blah, 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 and that, and I, I was like, "Yeah," and went around a couple of the old people again, and they'd go in the bathroom and use because they didn't want to use in front of me, and 2 days later, I'm knocking on the bathroom door. "It's okay, I want to use," and that, and it was the same thing. It was the same stories. It was the same games. It was the same. I just thought, oh my God, I've been out of the loop for like 2 months, and these people are still doing the same shit, talking the same stuff, And I got fronted some dope that I was supposed to sell and ended up doing it, and it was no good. What they gave me to sample wasn't the same, and anyhow, used all that up, so I burned that bridge, and that guy called me, and I'm like, oh, God, I had to give the money back. It was no good, blah, blah, blah. And so that was cut off. And other people that had called, I just started burning them. I was burning all these bridges, and I'm glad that I did. And I started, my other brother then that was using, he had gotten into some trouble. He knew some trouble was coming. And, of course, we do what we do. We go to NA when we know we're going to get sent to jail, And so he started going to meetings, and I'm like, oh, well, let me go with you, And I did, and I would just use sporadically, I got out in January, and I believe the first time I said I had a clean date was April 3rd. And then it changed to July because a guy that I was with got sent to prison. Of course, I never wrote him, I think I did write him. I never went and visited him or sent him any money, but he got out and came over to my house, and I knew where he was going. And I'm like, oh, I want to go with you. And he goes, you're going to lose your clean time. And I said, well, not if you don't tell anybody, And I'd used, and, it wasn't, I had all this change at home. I went through all that. I started charging shit on my mom's account again, and I'm like, God, I just can't keep doing this. I can't keep doing this. And so I started keep going back to meetings, and I remember being in a meeting and somebody sharing how they were struggling to stay clean. And it just hit me that, oh my God, I'm taking this for granted, that I can stay clean. So all those people, I'd kind of just let them all go. They'd call, and my sister's like, I'll answer the phone. And I'm like, no, I let her for a while. And then it's like, no, I'm just going to tell them I'm not using it anymore, And so I started going back to meetings faithfully, and probably for like 2 years, went to 5 meetings a week. And I got involved in the program. I'm grateful that my brothers were involved at that time because it was so much easier to go and hang with them, and go to functions and be with them and around their friends and that stuff. And I was accepted, and, I really wanted this way of life. And, it was just my time. It was my time. And so anyhow, my clean date now is July 3rd of 1992. And, I didn't know how sick I was at the time, and I got out, and I went to the dentist. The college was doing a free exam or whatever, and it was my sister's friend that had worked there and was going to school there, and she's the one that set me up with the appointment. And then she comes out, and she's like, oh, the dentist wants to talk to you. And I'm like, God, must be I'm an addict or something like that. I can't even get my teeth cleaned. And he came out there, and he had asked me all about my illness and what I went through in the hospital and all that stuff. And he said his sister was in a drug-induced coma and had the breathing problems. And I don't really know the technical name for it. I don't know what it was that I had. Was it associated with using? Probably so. They think I had a bacterial infection, and it just went through my bloodstream. The hole in my lung is called an empymema, and they did surgery and tried to go in there and sew it, but it just wouldn't heal like that. Your organs are closed from the inside out. So that's why I had that chest tube in my back for like a year. And I'd have to go to the doctor every so many months and have him change it, just to a smaller size of a catheter get it to shrink down and that stuff. But so I'm talking to this dentist, telling him all this stuff that I'd went through, and he's like, my sister just passed away, and she was in this coma. He goes, could you hear people talking to you? And I said, yeah, I could. You know, it was sporadic. I remember my brother and another recovering addict coming up, and it was New Year's Eve, and I remember kind of that they were going to the dance. You know, it's not vivid, it's just vaguely pieces, and I knew the other addict and that stuff, and a friend of mine, she was clean at the time, her and her mom and her son had come up, and I remember, you know, I was trying to hold my hand out, and she says, what were you trying to do? You kept holding your hand out. I said, I was trying to give him $1, the kid $1. And that stuff. So it was just kind of stuff like that. But, you know, I don't know. He goes, well, anyhow, the dentist said, you know, I just wanted to know that because that's all we kept telling her is that we loved her. You know, and I don't know. I hope my words were encouraging to him to know that, you know, she probably did hear him at one point or another, you know. So then I would have to keep going back to the doctors, you know, and the nurses would tell me, it's like, oh, you know, I've never known anybody that's been on the jet vent and lived. You know, there's like 3 people in her nursing career that had lived. And then I'm like, wow, you know, and I really started thinking that I am a miracle to be alive, you know, because I didn't. I just thought, you know, I ended up getting on disability. And when they sent me the disability check, I'm thinking, damn, I'm not disabled, you know. And then I had my arms and legs, and, you know, I'd make a bed and have to go take a nap, but, you know, I'm not disabled by any means, you know. It took over a year or so for my lungs to heal. You know, I'd go to an NA picnic and be wiped out and just sit at the picnic table and talk and be wiped out for 3 days later, you know, that first year. And that, but, you know, just, so I got a home group. You know, I did the suggestions with everybody, you know, what we say each time, you know, do 90 meetings in 90 days, get a home group, get a sponsor, work the steps. And so this time I really applied myself. I mean, I was slow at it, you know, I got a home group. I eventually got a sponsor, like at 60, 90 days clean. I started working the first step, and back then we didn't even have the literature, the step working guide or any of that stuff. It was a piece of paper from New Jersey or somebody's sponsor that had it and passed it around and took copies and that stuff, you know, but those are the things that I did because I really wanted to stay clean this time, you know, and I just, you know, I know God took away that desire for me to use, or my higher power did. And ever since that, it's like, I believe that if he can do that, anything else is possible too. You know, if he can take away that desire to use, because I could not stop on my own. Any willpower of my own, I couldn't do it. And so I, you know, just got involved, you know, and I've through my recovery, you know, I've had a strong opinion about Narcotics Anonymous. It's caused me a lot of pain and headaches and, you know, area and conventions and everything else, you know, but I'm grateful for all that. You know, I learned to argue with these people, but within a nice way. And sometimes I still don't. You know, I am still a work in fucking progress. And because I can, you know, it's something, you know, but I'm at that point in my life where it's like I don't want to fight no more. You know, I don't want to fight. And it's funny because, anyhow, I've had a few sponsors, and a couple years ago I got a new one. And, you know, she asked me where I was at with the steps, and I'm like, well, I've written on them. You know, I try to live them. And she was kind of like, And she goes, well, I think we need to start the steps over again. And I'm like, okay, you know. So I'm starting that again, you know, and it's been a while since I've formally written on the steps. And, anyhow, I text her one day about something stupid at work or whatever, and she's like, surrender to win. And this was like 2 years ago, and that surrender to win has stuck with me so much lately. You know, it's like, oh my God, when I can apply that in my life, I'm calm in a minute. You know, I can feel that peace inside of me. where I'm not trying to manipulate, control, and force the outcome on something, or trying to, control things at work, like I'm boss and everything else, or that I'm in charge, and even in recover in my life and stuff, and that. But it took me a long time, to finish all 12 steps. I wouldn't suggest that to anybody, but I did it at the pace that I could, and I'm grateful for that, because I just didn't write through them all 12 in 1 year. I know a lot of people just rush through the steps, and that's good for them. For me, it took me the time and the application and the understanding of them to get them done. And even today, and starting back over on them again, it's like a whole new light for me. I always thought, God, what the hell am I going to write again? But there is a lot still to write about, and still to see in my life, that needs changed, and areas that I still need to grow in. I don't know. The program has changed my life. I don't know how to say enough gratitude, or how to express that gratitude for it. Today I have a really good job. I have a house. I have all this outside stuff, but most importantly, I have peace inside of me today, for the most part. My mom died 2 years ago. Well, December. I think it's 2 years. December of 2011, and she had MS, and we took care of her for a long time. About the time I started, I think it was 2 years after I got clean, she had to retire from her work. And my mom raised us 4 kids, and 3 of us were addicts, and you can just imagine the hell that we put her through. But she was always there for us. Maybe sometimes too enabling, but she was always there. And what I wanted to share is when they told us that my dad had just had accidentally shot himself. I was 16. I was going through her drawers, and I found his death certificate, and it said that he had committed suicide. It was a suicide, and I'm like, well, this can't be right, And at the time, I had to go to this this alcohol counseling thing, and the guy was asking me, how'd your dad die? And I said, well, his death certificate said suicide, and he's like, oh, he's an alcoholic. I'm like, you don't even know my dad, And he's like, oh, for his age, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh. So I went back, and I finally asked my mom about that, and she said, yeah, that's what had happened. You didn't write no note. He just woke up one morning and went in the bathroom and shot himself. And, back then, this was like in 1959, people didn't talk about mental illness or health or issues like that, and still to this day, I believe my mom and them, they did the best they could in telling us that, because how were we going to understand what happened? My oldest brother was 5, my other one was 3, and I was just 7 months old, and my mom had remarried and had another daughter, and my sister, and that, so, but I just didn't trust my mom after that. I had a hard time with trust, and not just my mom, with trust issues and believing people, them telling me something, and through the process of the steps, I had a lot of self-centered fear, I had abandonment issues, insecurities, all those defects, and that, and it's all because of fear, and it's my self-centered fear, and, today I know that I have a God in my life that loves and cares for me and is greater than myself. And, when I tap into that, I'm okay with everything. I'm still single, and, and it's like I'm okay with that for the most part. Some days I still wish I was in a relationship, but, for the most part, I'm okay. I'm okay. And there's, and it works how and why it says what God's will for us. It's like with or without a partner, with or without money, and all this stuff. God's will is for us to be happy, joyous, and free, to live with dignity, and that, and that's what I try to strive for, and to live for, and I'm okay. But so anyhow, when my mom died, when I was writing on my first step, the very first time, I think there's a question in there that says, what is the most difficult thing that you think you can get through without being clean? And to me, it was the death of a loved one. And I truly believe if any of my family members would have died within those first few years, or I don't know when, I don't know that I would have stayed clean. And I'm grateful that my mom was able to see me have, the clean time, my life change, and not just me, but my other two brothers as well. My other sister's not an addict, and that, but at least she got to enjoy that, and I tried to make those amends to her. I did make my personal amends to her a long time ago, and so financially I could never have paid her back, never, and so I would just try to, pick up little items for her throughout the years or whatever and stuff, and it was hard. But anyhow, so she was, we had thought she was going to die so many times. They would call us and like, oh my God, we don't think your mom's going to make it through this. And it was like a 3-year span. Me and my brothers and sisters, we went and bought a life insurance, or went to the funeral home and purchased this insurance to have a burial for her, because my mom didn't have nothing. She didn't have nothing. And so for 3 years, me and my brothers and sisters, we paid on that. And it was kind of funny because we always told her, don't die that first year because it won't be covered, and that. And then 3.5 years later, it was paid for in 3 years, but the 3.5 years later, she passed away. But being in that hospital, so during that 3.5 years, we kept getting these calls all the time, and she had MS, she had a catheter, she didn't walk. She did eat like out of one hand and stuff, and so basically, we took care of her. Me and my sister took care of her, and my sister was the primary caregiver, and it was just trying to make her happy, and so when she died, we were all up at the hospital, and I just knew I was going to be the first one up there. We called at 6 o'clock. The nurses called us at 6 o'clock and said, oh, nope, everything was fine. She made it through the night. Everything was fine. My sister calls me. I get ready for work. 7:10, my phone rings, and it was my sister, and she goes, the hospital called and said, Mom's not doing well. We need to get up there right now. And I lived the closest, so I knew I was going to be the first one there. And I just remember praying, God, please don't let me make this decision on my own. And I'd gotten up there, and they were wheeling her away. They're like, oh, she coded, but we brought her back. But so much time had elapsed, like a half hour, that basically she wasn't getting no oxygen to her brain. And they kept her alive for like 3 days. They didn't know that there was no oxygen going, or that what had happened, and they have to go through this whole process. And so for 3 days, we just sat there, and I knew that second day that my mom had died. And but I just woke up, and I just started crying, and I'm like, I know she's gone, and I just couldn't stop. I called my sister. I went over there, and my sister's the one that I was always so afraid of when my mom passed away, of what would happen, because she took care of her. She was in a relationship with this guy, and he lived there, and that they broke up, and that wasn't all of their problems, but that played a big part in it, because she always had to take care of my mom, put her to bed first before she could go to bed, and so I was always scared for her, and I just kind of lost it then, and I think it's hitting my sister more now, because now she doesn't know what to do, but so for the next 2.5 days, we just sat there, and they would kind of give us some false hope, and that, well, medically they could keep her going, but that was it. There was she would still be on the life support and all this stuff, and we just couldn't do that, but I mean, I sat there, and it was okay. I was okay inside. I didn't want to use, I didn't want to use. That was the furthest thing from my mind. And went to a couple meetings or whatever, and anyhow, and then when she died, I had the friends of the fellowship to help me, and I know that's, and having God is how I got through that, and that first year has kind of been the hardest, going through each thing without her being there, and then after it was like that first year, it's like, you kind of just, every time a holiday or something was coming up, I knew I was just gonna, I'd start just being miserable. I would just start weeks before being miserable, and then the day would come and be past, and then I'd be okay, But so that first year was kind of the roughest, and it's gotten a little better. We still miss her, I mean, she was the backbone of my life, and that. But again, I'm grateful that I was clean. I'm glad that she got to see how the program worked in my life. We'd seen it work in my brother's, and I think she always knew that if we went and did that we could too, and we did, I've got 20 years clean, my other brother's got 21, and my other brother's got like 32 or something like that, whatever it is, 32 or 33, so that was great. But anyhow, I know, I didn't mean to share that long, but I guess that was just stuff I needed to share, and thanks for asking me, so that's it.